The sun rose over the small village of Umuaka, casting a golden glow over the rooftops of the mud houses and the lush green fields that surrounded them. The air buzzed with excitement. Today, Prince Olan, the heir to the royal throne, was coming to visit. He was on a journey to find his future queen, and every eligible maiden in the village had been preparing for weeks. Bright wrappers were carefully ironed, beads were polished to perfection, and hair was styled in intricate patterns. But not everyone in the village was preparing to meet the prince. In a small corner of the village, Nneoma sat quietly grinding millet for her stepmother, Madam Adana. Nneoma had always been treated as less than a daughter, a burden instead of a blessing. While her stepsisters, Ifeoma and Chioma, giggled and fussed over their appearances, Madam Adana had other plans for Nneoma. She saw her as nothing more than a servant to meet her every demand. Nneoma. Madam Adana's sharp voice echoed through the house. Why are you sitting there? Take the water pot and go to the stream. I need fresh water for cooking. Nneoma's heart sank. She knew what this meant. The stream was far, and fetching water would keep her away for hours. But stepmother, Nneoma began, her voice trembling, the prince is coming today. Can't I? Do you dare talk back to me? Madam Adana snapped, her face darkening. You think someone like you deserves to see the prince? Look at yourself. No royal blood would glance at a girl like you. Crushing the urge to argue, Nneoma tied her scarf tightly around her head, picked up the heavy pot, and started the long walk to the stream. As she trudged along the dusty path, she heard the lively chatter of other girls heading to the village square, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Her heart ached with longing, but she pushed the thought away. Life had never been fair to her, and she had learned not to hope for things beyond her reach. At the village square, Prince Olan arrived amidst a grand procession. Drummers beat their instruments, and villagers danced in colorful swirls of joy. The prince, dressed in regal attire of gold and deep green, dismounted his horse with quiet grace. His sharp features and confident aura made many maidens' hearts race. But despite the spectacle, his expression remained unreadable. He wasn't here for flattery, he sought authenticity, something rare and precious. Meanwhile, at the stream, Nneoma was kneeling by the water, filling her pot. The cool breeze and gentle rippling of the stream offered her a rare moment of peace. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching until they were almost upon her. Hello there, a deep, smooth voice said. Startled, Nneoma looked up, and her eyes widened. Standing before her was Prince Olan himself. She recognized him immediately from the stories she had heard. But why was he here, and why was he speaking to her? My prince, she stammered, quickly bowing her head. Forgive me, I didn't. No need to apologize, Olan interrupted gently, a small smile playing on his lips. I saw you from the path and thought I'd say hello. Why are you out here alone? Nneoma hesitated. Should she tell him the truth, that her stepmother had sent her away to keep her from meeting him? I came to fetch water, she finally said. It's my duty. The prince studied her for a moment. There was something about her, an honesty, a simplicity, that he hadn't seen in the other girls who had thrown themselves at him in other villages. What is your name? He asked. Nneoma, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Nneoma, he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. It suits you. Before Nneoma could respond, a loud commotion from the village square echoed through the air. Prince Olan turned his head briefly but didn't seem in a hurry to leave. Will you be at the square later? He asked, his gaze returning to her. Nneoma's cheeks flushed. I don't think so, my prince. The village buzzed with stories of Prince Olan's visit long after he had left the square. Women gossiped in the market, young men debated his character, and the maidens who had gathered to meet him recounted every glance and word with eager embellishment. But none of them knew about the prince's encounter at the stream. In the small compound where Nneoma lived, Madame Adana and her two daughters, Ifeoma and Chioma, were bursting with excitement. They had seen the prince up close and were convinced he had noticed them. "He looked right at me when he dismounted his horse," Ifeoma bragged, twirling a strand of her beaded hair. "Nonsense," Chioma interjected. "He smiled at me when I greeted him." "You were standing too far back for him to notice you." Nneoma listened quietly from the corner where she was grinding pepper. Her stepmother had given her a mountain of chores to complete, as usual. She tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the prince, his kind eyes, his gentle smile, the way he had said her name. It all felt like a dream. "Nneoma." Madame Adana's sharp voice broke her reverie. "Stop daydreaming and finish your work. We need to prepare for tomorrow. The prince may visit again." "Yes, stepmother," Nneoma replied, lowering her head to hide her emotions. Meanwhile, at the palace, Prince Olan was deep in thought. His advisors and attendants surrounded him, discussing the day's events and the women he had met, but Olan barely listened. His mind kept returning to the girl at the stream. There had been something genuine about her, something that stood out from the polished smiles and practiced courtesies of the other maidens. "Your Highness," his chief advisor said, breaking through his thoughts, "have you made any decisions about the woman you met today?" Olan shook his head. "Not yet. I need more time." The advisor nodded, though he seemed slightly frustrated. "Very well, Your Highness. We will continue to visit other villages as planned." The prince nodded absent-mindedly, but his heart wasn't in it. He resolved to return to Umuaka before leaving for the next village. He wanted to see Nneoma again, to learn more about her. The next morning, Nneoma was at the market helping her stepmother sell vegetables. She worked diligently, arranging the produce and attending to customers, but the whispers and stares of the villagers made her uncomfortable. She caught snippets of conversations as she moved through the crowded stalls. "Did you hear? The prince was seen near the stream yesterday. Who was he talking to?" "No one seems to know. It couldn't have been anyone important. Probably just a servant fetching water." Nneoma's cheeks burned, and she kept her head down, hoping no one would connect her to the story. But deep down, a small part of her felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the prince would come back. Maybe he would remember her. By the time the sun began to set, Nneoma was exhausted. She returned home with Madame Adana and her stepsisters, carrying the unsold vegetables on her head. As she approached the compound, she heard a commotion. Villagers were gathering outside their gates, murmuring excitedly. "What is going on?" Madame Adana demanded, pushing through the crowd. Standing in the center of the crowd was Prince Olan, his regal presence unmistakable. He turned toward Madame Adana and spoke with authority. "I have come to speak with Nneoma." Gasps erupted from the onlookers. Nneoma's heart stopped. Her stepmother's face twisted with shock and barely concealed anger. Ifeoma and Chioma exchanged looks of disbelief. "Nneoma," Madame Adana repeated, her voice rising. What could the prince possibly want with her? Olan's gaze was steady. "I would like to speak with her alone." The crowd fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Nneoma stepped forward hesitantly, her heart pounding in her chest. The villagers' eyes burned into her, some curious, others filled with disbelief. Madame Adana's face flushed with anger as she moved to block Nneoma's path.